Hey, welcome back to True-Moto-Resto. And today's video we're going to be disassembling the 84 CBX750F. So before we get into the actual disassembly, I just want to go through just a few things about the process I follow and what you're going to see. So first and foremost, I take the bodywork off, and there'll be maybe a separate video on that. It's kind of all sitting around here that I've been already going through the process of stripping off the old paint. But the main part of the bike, the disassembly process that I follow, first thing I do is if I can, if I've got the time, this has been sitting around for a few weeks like this, and every day or two I'll go ahead and I'll use some penetrating oil of some sort. Like this PB Blaster, PB50, on areas like the exhaust retaining studs, and anything where I'm concerned on these old bikes that it might be difficult to get the fasteners off, I'll give it a shot of that. Maybe 5 times over the period of a week or something like that, just to make sure, or a bit of additional insurance to help the process along. Some of these old fasteners can strip pretty easy. But what you will see if I disappear out of frame while the process is going on, what is actually happening is every single step that I take gets recorded in my book. So there I write down the step, and then what I'm doing in that step, and then if I've taken a part off or some bolts or whatnot. So this is where the CBX starts. So basically this page is step 1 to 11. And then there's a corresponding Ziploc bag. Some people use boxes. I use boxes and bags, so I use, depending on the size of the parts, Ziploc bags. That Ziploc bag will get numbered to correspond with the step in the book. And then if the bolts are off something specific, aside from writing it down here, it'll also get written on the bag. So for any reason, if I were to lose that page out of my book, it's still written on the bag what the bolts or the parts are for. The other thing I do is every stage of the teardown, I'll go through and take pictures of everything that I can think of from every angle. And then if I get a little bit further into the teardown, I'll take a pile of pictures again from a bunch of different angles. And when I think I've got enough pictures, I'll take some more, because inevitably I will get to a part in the restoration process where I can't quite remember how, maybe it's a particular wiring connector fits, or where a hose and a wire and an air line for a shock absorber or something like that, how do they actually interact with each other when the bike was originally put together. So unless you've actually got photographs, you're not going to get that right. And where I think photographs might not be clear enough, I'll actually make a detailed diagram in my book as well. So now if I was a specialist in, CBX 750s, and I'd done 10 or 20 of them, I probably wouldn't need to go to that extreme. But that's kind of not the kind of bike collector that I am. I tend to have a very wide and diverse set of bikes, and if I'm doing a restoration on one of those bikes, chances are I've never done that bike before. But typically I like to do something different every time. I like to do something new, challenge myself in a different way, get kind of a new experience out of it. So that's just a couple of tips for me. And then you'll see down under here there's a whole pile of storage bins. All the parts will go into bins, and they'll all be labeled as they come off. So typically there's going to be anywhere from 5 to 10 large totes or bins of parts by the time this is taken apart. And then the other thing that I'll usually do is as the bike comes apart, again, back in the notebook, if I find something there that needs to be replaced or repaired, that'll get noted in the margin of the notebook right next to the disassembly point that it came off the bike. And then I'll usually also keep a separate page of things that I need to buy as I find them as well. So I typically try to have all of the parts that I know of that I'm going to need already purchased. But inevitably, when you're pulling one of these bikes apart, you're going to find more than one thing that you need to change, replace, fix, repair, whatever you want to call it, buy a new one of. So it's always good just to keep track of all that stuff and order it as you find it, because some of that stuff is going to be hard to find. It's going to take a while to get here, and you don't want the project on hold for too long. At least I don't. The other thing I'll show you as well, just from an interest perspective, is it's important that when you start refurbishing the body parts and the fairings and the plastics and the tank and whatnot on the bikes, that you get the decals back in the right place. Photographs are exceptionally good for that, of course, but sometimes it's important and valuable and helpful to have some measurements on hand about where exactly the decals need to be placed. Like on a panel like this, it would be fairly easy to get the distance here, too big or too small, or here. When the distances kind of are different at one end than they are to the other, and how do you take your measurement? Do you take it from the edge of the decal to the apex of the curve there, or do you bring it all the way down to the edge? And these kinds of things, you'll get to a point when you go to put these things back together and you want to put the decals on, and you can't remember, or the photograph looks like you're going to get it in the right place. But why not take a few extra minutes, and make a couple of diagrams with some detailed measurements on them? So, I'll typically, I'll go through and I'll make pictures, draw pictures of all the body panels, and take all kinds of measurements around decal placement. So there's some side panels, there's the gas tank, that's the belly pan, windshield, the tail section, etc. And then this is obviously the CBX upper fairing. So this is all just insurance to make sure that when this thing goes back together, that I've got as good a chance as possible of getting this thing back to the way that it was originally before I started tearing it apart. Now, sure, that doesn't guarantee that if somebody else put decals on before me and did it wrong, that I'm not going to reproduce that problem. But I'll do a little bit of research online if I can as well, just to make sure that what I'm starting with is reasonably accurate. Now, the other thing is, when I do my restorations, I'll call them restorations. There's probably a lot of different people out there with different definitions of what's a restoration versus a refresh or whatever else, but I'm not going to get into semantics or debates on that. So when I go through and restore a bike, I will say that these are not concourse restorations. I'm not a professional. This is just a home hobby. My objective is to get the bike as looking as good as I can get it, at what I believe is a reasonable expenditure on my part. So there's going to be a certain value with every bike, both before and after you've done a restoration on it. And what I tried to make sure is that I haven't got so much money invested in these bikes way beyond their worth or value at the end of it all. So when I get into a particular project, when I buy a bike, I'll have to do an assessment of what I think it's going to cost me to restore it, and then just generally make sure that it's going to be worth it at the end of the day to me. Like if a bike's going to be worth $5,000, for instance, when it's finished, why would I put $10,000 into restoring it? It just makes no financial sense whatsoever. There are exceptions to that rule, of course. If you've got an emotional attachment to a vehicle or to a bike, and you want to spend that money because you have no intention of ever parting with it, then go for it. If you can afford to do that and that's what makes you happy, then you go ahead and do it. In my case, I don't have emotional attachment to too many of these, and I do this for fun. I collect because I enjoy looking at them and riding them and restoring them and whatnot, but I do it to a price point. Things like fasteners and bolts and nuts, there's a lot of guys who do far more high caliber work than I do. They'll send every fastener away to be replated and whatnot, and I watch in amazement at the skill and the quality of those restorations. So that's kind of something that maybe I can aspire to in how I go about doing my work, but I'm always going to do it to a price point. I don't have the free-flowing cash to be able to throw unlimited amounts of money, at a bike that's only going to be worth a limited amount at the end of the day. So I just try to be careful about how much I spend, and I have to make decisions along the way as to what gets repaired versus what gets replaced, or how far I'm going to go, let's say with an engine tear down. All of those kinds of things will factor into it. So you'll see some of that as we go through the CBX750. And with regard to the sequence of disassembly, I really don't have any particular order that I go at things, except to say that I try to just do whatever kind of seems logical at the time. Like I don't work my way, I don't take the engine out first always, or I try to basically leave the thing on its wheels as long as I can, and I'll try to take off all of the accessories, everything off the frame first, that kind of thing. But I don't say, well, kind of start at the front and then work my way to the back. I just you'll see me jumping, from the back to the front. I'll go from the bottom to the top. It's just kind of whatever occurs to me at the time. I will tackle it that way. right, so we're getting closer in the disassembly here. So I think what's going to happen next is I'm going to take off some of the switch gear and the brakes at the front, and the clutch master and slave, that'll come off. Probably the shifter will come off, and then I think we'll end up taking the engine out after that. So a couple of things I need to figure out is I've never taken out this engine out of one of these bikes for sure. So I think, as I mentioned before, it's really simple when you've got a removable frame section, and you basically just build around the engine. The engine is your cornerstone, and then you take the frame off the engine and build it up and down that way. So that's not going to be that easy. And from what I hear, what I see, doing a little bit of research online and some advice from folks on YouTube, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a wrestling match. And so whatever method I come up with to get it out has got to be viable for putting it back in without scratching up the frame. So obviously I'll have to put some sort of protective material on the frame to get it back in, but there's not very much room. I think by the time you look at, if you see underneath where the pan is, I kind of measured about a minimum of 7 centimeters of pan and whatnot is hanging down below the top level of the frame. And when you come up to the top here, you know, there's probably barely over 7 centimeters of gap there. And I'm also told that, and I can see how this is true, is that the curvature of the frame here is a real interference with the bottom leading edge of that oil pan. So some of the advice that I've received is take the oil pan off, take the pickup and the strainer out, pull the cam cover, and then it's just a case of muscling the engine out with a couple of guys to get it out. Now I've seen people use a 2x4 passed through here, strapped to the engine to lift it out. I've seen a really good setup using an engine hoist, which I have, but then so it looks like somebody had to kind of fabricate a kind of a C-section that would, one part of the C-section would go underneath the frame, and then the part that goes over top of the frame is the part that the engine hoist would attach to. So you attach the engine to kind of to this piece, and you attach the hoist to this piece, and you can kind of slide it in. And then when you lift it up, you can actually slide the whole lot out, whereas just trying to use the main arm off the hoist, it has to come down at such an angle it won't really work out, I don't think. So, all right, so here's the current thinking as far as getting the engine out. So the first thing is I'm going to take the clutch out, lighten it up a little bit. I'll take the oil pan off for clearance, and I'm going to leave the valve cover on. Because of the way I'm planning to strap the engine, I don't want straps coming across here and doing any sort of, well, maybe I might have to take these off eventually, but what I don't want to have happen is I don't want to have straps carrying the engine weight pressing down on any, if there's any oil lines in here. I haven't taken the cover off to know what's in there yet, so I'm kind of speaking prematurely on that. But aside from that, what I think I'm going to do is take the bike off the lift, because when I'm maneuvering the engine out, clearing this is going to add an extra 6 inches to the whole clearing process by the time I want to get it on the ground. So the less stuff I have to deal with clearance on, the better. So if I move the bike off the lift, I'll move to the lift if I can. I've got a trolley for it. I'll move it back over here out of the way. I'm going to take the engine hoist, which is over here in the corner, and I am going to try to use it. And what I'll do is I'll put a 2x4 through here and block it to the engine in the bottom and shim it against here, so then I have good leverage downwards and forwards. And then in order to get enough clearance to get this side of the engine all the way over here, if I suspend the straps from the hoist to the 2x4, at least about 18 inches high, and then have them about 24 inches out, that will give me enough room when I start to slide everything out, that by the time the strap hits here, the engine is going to be out here. So then I should be able to lower down the hoist sufficiently to get it out of the bike. And I'm also going to have, there's about, you know, eight or so inches of clearance I'm not going to have to deal with this way as well, up and down. So that's the current thought. Part of the fun and games of doing this stuff is figuring this out. So I'm going to give that a bit more thinking about, and then if that works that way, I might actually be able to do this alone using the engine lift, the little crane thing there, instead of two people. And I do have one of those balance shafts. I can't remember what they're called. It's probably actually sitting right over here. What is it called? You can see it right there. It's got a crank handle, and you can use the chains, attach that to the engine or the 2x4, whatever I'm going to use in this case. Engine leveler, that's what it's called. So then you can use the crank handle as well as the up and down motion of the lift to kind of tilt the engine back and forward, up and down with the lift. And the only thing I would have to potentially use some extra wood on the 2x4 is to move the engine this way. Which, given that I'm guessing the engine is going to be fairly front heavy, is going to want to tilt forward, and I may need to have leverage to kind of tilt it back. So it probably would be wise to have a second person here anyway, just to help if I'm operating the lift, and have the other person manhandling the 2x4 just to give it extra leverage and get it out.